Hey everyone, this is Adam. Welcome to Sunflower Woodworking. Today we're going to be working on a project that's specifically for the shop to help out with having some workspace to work on projects. So in my workshop, I've got several Bora Centipedes, which the legs come out and give me the ability to create a workspace temporarily because I don't have a big shop. As you can probably see in the background of the video, I've got a ton of stuff in here. It's our garage, it's our workshop, it's everything. So I rely on my Bora Centipedes in order to break down and set up workplaces when I need them. And what you're looking at here is a multi-function table that I made recently. This is version 3.0. I've created a few different ones. I finally broke down and decided to make one out of Baltic Birch, give me a much flatter surface, a much more stable surface. And as you can see, I got dog holes on one side and T-track on the other. What you don't see on this is that this is also where I connect my planer sled. You can see these holes over here. And I've got rails that connect to the left and right sides. And then my planer sled sits on top of it and screws down into the table. So today we're going to make the sister to this one. I've already taken some time and cut it down to size and got the hinges on there. This one we're going to do dog holes on one side, but we're going to do something different. Instead of T-track on the other side, we're actually going to do a router table. So I actually bought a router table insert, and I've got a fence. I'm going to put some T-tracks on it, and we're going to make this into a collapsible router table. I would love to have a permanent router table or even a table saw that's got a router table built into it, but space is a premium, especially when I'm stocked with lumber like I am right now and have 5 or 6 projects going on. Don't have place for a solid table or for a router table. So I could put this up and take it down whenever I need to. So we're going to go through the process today, probably over the next few sessions, to go ahead and turn this piece of Baltic Birch into a multifunction table with a router table insert. So one thing that anybody that's had one of these Bora Centipedes will notice is that even though this is a 4x4 centipede, so it has 9 legs, and the 9 legs, when you open it all the way up, it's supposed to be 48 inches. But with these toppers right here that support the wood on top, it actually measures out to 50 inches by 50 inches, right? So in my previous versions, I took a 4x8 sheet of plywood, cut it in half, and figured that's going to work perfect. But then what happened was it was actually always fussing with the corner being like that. So as you're moving wood and you're clamping down and sanding or doing anything else, the table moves and eventually it works its way out. Now, I could put the pegs in these holes here to try and hold it down, but then it's in the way, right? It's in my workplace and it gets annoying, especially when you're moving fast. You're trying to get certain things done. You're shifting gears. Maybe you're working on 2 or 3 projects and things just get in the way. So what I'd like to do with these new designs is, number one, cover that completely, which it does. So as we come over here onto this table, it covers it completely with a little bit of overhang. So then what I can do is put some T-nuts on the bottom and then screw that into the T-nut so that it holds the surface nice and tight to the Bora, right? So that's the first thing, is making sure we got to cut the size. And then I cut it down the middle here using my Makita track saw. Gives me a nice straight cut. And then just got these, these hinges from the local hardware store, cut them in half, and Bob's your uncle. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually mark out where I'm going to put the dog holes, and then use a drill bit to drill out the center of those dog holes, because then I'm going to follow that up with some fastener bits, give me a nice clean circle, nice clean hole, and we'll cover all that here in just a few minutes. So let's get started. All right, so now we got everything marked. And each time I've redone these tables, I've looked online to get different ideas of where to place the dog holes. And at the end of the day, it seems like it's almost based on your process, based on what you're going to do, based on the types of tools and adapters that you have. So I do the first one's about 4 inches from the corners of this side. The next one in the center, so about 13 inches off the edge here. And then about 8 inches apart for the first couple rows. And then the center rows are about 5.5 inches apart. So that gives me at least one area where they're a little bit closer together, right? So if I need to do work on smaller pieces or clamp down smaller pieces. But frankly, with working with the other table, ever since I did this pattern on the sister table to this, those seem to work, that spacing seems to work very, very well. So I'm going to go with that on this table as well. So one thing I'm going to do now is where the lines intersect, I'm actually going to take this punch and get a little starter dimple in the wood, right? Now I've got this Milescraft jig here that helps you do nice straight holes down into the plywood here, but it's always nice to have that starter hole because sometimes the bit walks a little bit. So getting that little starter hole with the punch will help that drill bit find the center and drill down even better and even straighter. So now that I got the pilot holes started, now I'm going to take a 3/4 inch Forstner bit and I'm going to drill the top few layers on one side, and then I'm going to flip the table over. And since I have those pilot holes, I know where my holes are coming from one side. I'm going to start, do it from the bottom, and then I'm going to flip it over and then drill the rest of the way through the top. That gives me a nice, clean, round hole on the top and the bottom. Because what happened in my other tables is as I was coming through, especially when you get to the later holes, after you've had enough of drilling these holes, you start to put a little more pressure than you should. But what it prevents is getting tear out on the other side, right? So as you're pushing through, as it's drilling, you get to that last little bit of wood on the other side, and you're putting pressure on that drill bit, and then it ends up just pushing through. The last layer gives way and just breaks open. Now, if you put an equal amount of pressure and you just let the bit guide, you can prevent that. I'd like to just prevent it all the way around. So I drill halfway from one side, flip it over, drill halfway from the other side. All right, so let's get drilling. So now you can see the holes are all drilled about halfway through the 3/4 inch Baltic Birch. All of them went pretty well, pretty easily. The arms are only a little bit sore. So now we're going to flip this over and come in through the other side. Okay, so finish coming through on the other side. And I took a regular 3/4 inch drill bit and just cleaned out the holes because even though I did everything I could to keep those the Forstner bit going straight down, it does walk a little bit sometimes, which leaves a little bit of a lip inside the hole. But taking a regular 3/4 inch drill bit and just running it through there real quick does a great job of cleaning it up. So now that we got everything all cleaned up and all the holes done, I grabbed a few of the different dog bench tools I've got and just sliding them in the holes just to make sure the holes fit nicely, everything is clean. I've already gone through and played with a few of the parts and a few different holes, but I usually put them through all of them just to make sure everything is fitting all right. Because once we get into the finish later on, the wood will swell just a little bit. So I always make sure there's just a little bit of play, but not too much where it's going to basically render the tools useless. But just a tiny bit of play because I am going to get some swell once I put the finish on this table, right? So that's it for the dog bench, or the dog bench side of it. Next, we're going to start working out what is the router table side going to look like and how we're going to put that one together. So let's get everything out and take a look at the manual. And we'll see what we can figure out without it. Now we're going to get into a part that just about every woodworker and tool nut that I know really enjoys, and that's unboxing. So I got a setup here, a router lift and a fencing system. Got off of Amazon. It's by O School. And just as a disclaimer for this entire video and any videos I have, no sponsors. If you see any brand names like Jet in the background or DeWalt on my tools and whatnot, it's just the brand I use. So no sponsorship stuff associated with it. Now, I looked at a lot of different router lift systems, different price points, different functions and features. There are so many things I considered, and if you want to know more, put a comment in there, and I'll do my best to answer that out on the things that I considered. But this particular router lift system met my needs, it met my specs. It was the price point that I was looking for, and now we're going to pull it out of the box, take a look at everything, and see how it's going to work for our table, and then we'll figure out how to lay it all out, T-tracks and whatnot, and then get working on the next pieces of this MFT, right? So here we go. So I've done a few things, and now I've put together the fencing system and also put together the router lift, and then did all the adjustments and calibrations and everything on it that I could do before I actually get it installed. I also took a few minutes to figure out how do I want this all placed on the router table. So first of all, figuring out where I wanted to place the lift. As you can see, it's placed pretty far back. Now I do have a portable router table, which was fine for a few years, but as I got into more complex projects, I started doing things with bigger stock, and that little router table was really difficult to get the wood moved across. So I wanted it set back a little bit further so that I had more room to work with bigger stock, but not so far back that one, I'm weakening the wood near the edge, and also so I'm not reaching too far to get to the router bit and to get the material to the router bit. But I also have one thing I got to pay attention to underneath, and that's with the Bora Centipede, there are a lot of cross members that hold the vertical supports in place. So it couldn't go so far back because there is a set of cross members all the way down the center of the table underneath, and the base, or the I don't know what you call them, axles, or the guides for the for the router lift would actually start hitting, or the router body itself might actually start hitting those cross members. So I did some measurements, did some finagling, try and get it further back, but where I'm not going to be sitting on those cross members or interfering with them, so everything's got good clearance. So I could also reach the router if I need to. So everything is all set there. Then once I got the router lift position set where I wanted it, then it was time to set where I'm going to put the T-track that the fence system is gonna sit on. So there are these notches in the back. So I marked the lines, measured everything out 15 inches in, which puts it right about the center of these notches here on both sides, right? So I could put the T-track with this as my center line, and then it came with parts for the adjustment handles to lock it in place. So that way I can move that fence wherever I need to move it. Now, it's not going to be necessary to put the T-track all the way to the depth of the table for this section of the table, but I am going to do it anyway. I'm going to put it from front to the center line of the table, because who knows? I might, one day use this part of the table without the router insert, and may just need it to clamp something else down. So I'm giving myself a little bit of playroom. Honestly, the only thing I really need in terms of the fence is that it's from the center of where that lift is and backwards, because that's basically where the bit's going to live, right? Yeah, so I have to second think this now, because maybe I don't want this so far back. I'll be right back.
10 minutes later.
All right, changed my mind. I think I got a good reason. Let me show you what I changed. So what you may notice is that marking is now further south. It's further this way. As I was describing to y'all what I was going to do, I realized, well, wait a minute. The bit's going to be in the center of this square, and I gave myself more room on the front end, but what if there's something where I'm routing a groove further, not away from the edge? I'm not just doing edge work with a router bit. If I'm actually creating a juice channel in a cutting board, which I don't make cutting boards, but maybe someday I will. But with other projects, what if I need the fence further back so that the router bit is on this side of the material? Then I just cut myself short. So you know what? I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to put it here in the center. That's where I originally had it before I decided to move it back. And now I moved it back in the center, because once I cut this, I can't change it. All right. Well, I could try to fake it, but it's not going to be pretty. So I only want to cut once. So I moved it back to the center. I still have, looking at where the router bit is going to lie, or where it's going to come through, it still gives me about 13 inches of clearance on the front, and then about 13 inches of clearance in the back. So that's not too bad. That's not too bad. I can definitely work with that. And that will make things a little bit more flexible. So all that's left now is to get the router guides all set up. What I'm going to do is route out the placement for the T-track first, and get that set in. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to take about 3, I think the thickness of this plate is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to route out 3/8 of an inch out of the plywood where the lift goes. And then after I get that routed out, I'm going to cut the hole where the lift system itself is going to sit. So I want to leave an edge inside that recess so that I can put some T-nuts in there and be able to bolt this thing down nice and snug so it doesn't move. There's some great adjustment screws already on this lift plate, so I'll make some adjustments on that. But first, let's get those holes cut and see what that all is going to look like. All right, so we got the T-track recesses all routed out, and a couple things that were going on during the routing. So number one was the table kept moving off the feet, right? off the supports. Like I said earlier in the video, one of the things I'll have to do is make it so that, you know, Bora has these slots here. They have some clamps that will hold the end of the table down. It does a decent job. But like I said, I don't want something sitting on top of the surface when I'm doing that. So I didn't have the tabletop clamped down at all. So it's just a great reminder that once this is all done, before I get to the finishing, I'm going to put it upside down, take the other centipede, put it on top, and then figure out where I'm going to put some T-nuts and some screws so that these four corners at a minimum are fastened to the table when I'm using it. Because once I start pushing stock against the router in the center there, it's going to move the table again. So it did cause a little tiny problem. The table did move when I was routing, and it got away from me just a little bit. That's fine, not a big deal. The other thing was the addition of this other track that goes all the way across the bottom. Something I just remembered when I started routing is like, well, wait a minute. Eventually you want to be able to do some kind of router sled or even jigs. I see a lot of guys online, a lot of videos, some of the Facebook groups and that, where they're actually putting jigs and sleds on there to get more complex and more robust routing done. So the original plan was to have one of those. I just remembered as I'm trying to focus on getting this stuff installed, I had to forward think a little bit. It's like, how else am I going to use this? Got to have that other T-track. Fortunately, I have some cross-section T-track that makes a nice little intersection there. So I just got to clean them off because those are what I used on the old table. I had a little T-track sitting in the middle. Long story short, it was a bad idea the way I designed it. Good in the head, bad in practice. I could never use them. But anyway, I have those parts. They just have some CA glue on them because I glue everything down inside the track in addition to screws. So I just got to clean those up and then I can set those in. Right. So next what I got to do is to take a chisel and clean that out a little bit. When I did the other router table, I actually took them apart. Forgot about doing that today. So this one came out nice and clean. I just take a chisel and clean out, square that off. This one, I nicked the other table just a little bit, but nothing I'm going to lose sleep over. But still going to use a chisel and square that off a bit. Right. Now it's time to do this one. And let me go into the cabinets here. I got a couple different jigs that will help out with that, and we see what I can find. All right, so taking a look around the cabinets, I found a jig that I got a while back for routers. Unfortunately, it has one little drawback. It's only designed to do squares. It can do rectangle. Actually, it can't do rectangles. The way they have these slots cut and the way it assembles together, tried a bunch of different ways, couldn't really get a rectangle. So what I'll have to do is do two edges at a time. So I'll go across, do the top edge, turn it around, come across and do the bottom edge. So I'll get those two sides done. Now I'll take the jig off, flip it around, and then do the sides. What I'm trying to do is get my depth set for at least one row on the inside of the square, because that's where the lift is going to sit, is on those edges, right? So 3/4 of an inch in. I'll probably do a second row once I get that outer row taken care of. But just like doing the T-track, ironically, the depth of the router lift plate is the same as the depth of the T-track. They're 9.5, about 9.5 millimeter, which is great. Didn't have to reset the router, but I'll do a couple passes like I did with the T-track slots. I'll do a couple passes so I don't bog down the router too much. And that bit has seen better days. I wish I had another 3/4 bit like it. I don't, so I'm just gonna take smaller passes and use this one till it burns up. All right, now that we got the rough shape made out, I'm going to go ahead and take a couple chisels, and clean out those corners a little bit more, because we're going to use another adapter for the router to cut out that centerpiece here in a few minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and get that cleaned out. So I used the chisels, cleaned up the corners, and then I took the router and went back and took the stuff that's in the middle. I went ahead and took that back a little bit further away from the edge. Had a few different things they could have used to cut out that center piece. I decided I'm going to use my multi-tool to go ahead and cut that out. It's easiest because I don't have to put any jigs or guides or anything else. I'll just so I just drew a line 3 centimeters in, which is what, just over an inch, maybe an inch and an eighth. So that way it gives me enough room to clear this spot here. As you can see, if I measure out 3 on this, it gives me plenty of space there to put a T-nut and to screw that down. I'm probably going to have to go back and cut this in a little bit. You can see there it's about 2 centimeters in. So with the 3, it's going to be out a little bit. But once I get this cut out, I can go back and mark where this is going to be and then cut that last little piece out. So let's get cutting. That worked out pretty well. So had to do a little fine tuning on the hole, a little bit of sanding, a couple different sanders to try and get in the spots that I wanted to get into. But other than, a little sloppy in the corners, but for the most part, it's in a very solid place. So I did the check with my square. It doesn't, obviously these set screws that help level it out have to be pushed down a bit. But it checked all the way around, and it's a little bit below the surface, which is what I would like to see, because then I can use the set screws to raise it up a little bit if I need to. I've already marked the holes here where I'll drill to put the T-nuts, because there's some screws that came with this template or with this lift that allow me to kind of bolt it down when I need to. One thing I got to keep in mind is that this is not going to stay in this table. So anytime I have to break down the table and use it for something else, or just need to get it out of the way, I just want to be able to pull those four screws out and then take the lift out of the table so that I can put it away in the cabinet. I got a cabinet that I use for all my router parts. I'll put that in the cabinet so then I can fold up this tabletop and tuck it away to use the space for something else. So this is going to get me there. Not going to have to do too much more adjustment to this. It's very flush. It's right where I want it. Next thing I want to do is get the T-track put in here, get all that cut, get it put in, test out the fence, put a router inside of the lift, and then give it a whirl. Make sure everything's working and everything's doing what I want it to do before I go into the last phase, which will be sanding the whole table down on both sides and then putting a finish on it. So let's finish getting this thing put together for our dry fit. So we finished a few things. Got the T-track all laid in with the cross sections, and did a little bit more cleanup on the place for the router lift, and got that seated in there. Got the T-nuts in. Had to switch out screws a few times. The screws that came with it stripped out very, very easily, that's going to be a problem in the long term because this is going to be taken apart and put back together many times in the future because it's a collapsible table. Something I got to be able to put away. So wasn't going to be dealing with, didn't want to be dealing with stripping screws because they were just a very soft metal. So I put some good solid steel screws in there, and then cut the T-track to get that all fitted into place. Almost took off part of my leg, but all good. So what we get to do now is dry fit everything. We got the rudder lift all in place already. I got the fence all put together and just going to put a few more parts in there. So with the T-track, I left these ends open. Didn't really need to. Thought about putting one more little piece. I got plenty of little pieces of T-track to fill that in. I just like being able to get things in and out a little bit more easily. Plus, we don't know what the future is going to hold, so definitely going to leave that open. I'm going to put the lift down for just a minute. For a more budget type lift, very smooth action. It glides very smoothly when you're turning the screws. Very happy with it. This plate is very solid. It's about, about 9.5 centimeters thick. Not centimeters, 9.5 millimeters thick. About 3/8 of an inch, but it's really, really solid. It is ground aluminum, but a very solid piece. So I'm going to put the fence on the T-nuts there. Put on the washers. Put on handle 1. Be a little bit loose. Handle 2. All right. Move these pieces out of the way here. I'm doing this with one hand, so I'm not moving both pieces back at the same time, which is what I probably want to do. And obviously I can slide this back and forth. I centered the T-track on those oval-shaped holes there so I can always adjust based on what I'm doing. But as you can see, that fits pretty well. I'm going to tighten this down because I want to see how it seats over the plate. So the plate is just a hair underneath. on one side, and that's fine because there are these set screws all along the edge of the plate. Later on, after I get the finish done, I can go back and reset this, tune it in a little bit more, then use some CA glue or super glue to get those set screws to more or less stay in place. I mean, they're always going to break free eventually, but at least get them to stay in place for a while. So every time I take out the lift and put it back in, it's sitting flush with the table. I'm not too worried about it sitting a little bit low. I mean, you can feel a little bit of this edge, but not a big deal at this point. I mean, it may be more of a big deal once I actually start using it and realize, oh, I absolutely hate that. But it's something that can be easily fixed. So now I'm going to put the insert plate, obviously a little bit too small, but I'm not going to be running this up. Take this handle here. Oops. Follow the instructions to tighten. That's in place. Router bit will obviously come out through there. Now, depends on the router bit. This setup comes with 4 different face plates or 4 different inserts, which is great. That's pretty much a standard size. But we have 4 other sizes to work with. Right? So obviously if I'm doing a larger bit and doing some kind of ad hoc milling, I'd probably put my mill together on the other table, but can also do it here. Right? And it seems pretty snug, perfect fit for the surface. Just overall, like I said, really pleased with this setup for what we paid for it. Just really decent quality. It's not a Rockler, and it's not a Woodpeckers or one of the other high-end brands, but for what it is pretty rock solid. Can't wait to get the finish done on this and get it running for the first time. With everything put together, I'd love to say it's done and to start using it, but even on these NFTs and MFTs and MPTs, so multifunction tables, multi-purpose tables, I do like to have some kind of finish on it. The first one I ever did, I didn't do a finish, and within a month it was destroyed. Spilled water on it, some stain and some dyes dripped on it, dripped something else on it that caused the top layer of the plywood to bubble up a bit. The second version of the MFT I did with MDF, and that one I put a spar urethane finish on it, and it was fine. It did cause the MDF to swell quite a bit, so those 3/4 inch holes, I had to go back and re-drill them because they did swell quite a bit. But the dog holes were not strong enough. MDF, maybe if it was a double layer, is a 3/4 inch. I think if I would have done it thicker, maybe it would have lasted a little bit longer, but the holes started to wear out pretty quickly. And besides, anytime I smacked anything on it with a hammer or with a mallet or doing anything else, it was causing dimples and divots. And after about 4 months, they're pretty well beat up. This one, both of these that I've got here are Baltic Birch ply. So I think it's 11-layer Baltic Birch. Strong stuff, great stuff, but I still want to protect it. Now, I've become a big fan of homemade finishes. I have about a half a dozen different finishes. Even the coloring of my finishes, I use Mix-All Universal dyes. I like to mix my own colors. So I don't use a lot of stains in that. I'll, depending on what I'm working with and what kind of finish I'm looking for, I'll just mix the colors in. But this one is a boiled linseed oil and I think it's either paraffin or beeswax. I found the recipe online. If I can find the article, I'll put a link in there and give credit to the great gentleman who led me to this. But with this table over here, you can see, added a little honey color. But man, this finish has put up with a lot of abuse. There are some scratches in this table already. But the great thing about the BLO, or the boiled linseed oil and wax, is that if it starts to wear down, I can put another coat of it on there. Pretty easy to match, but we're talking about an MFT and MPT, so I'm not really worried about it always looking beautiful. I just want to protect it, keep the glue out of it, keep the water out of it. And this mix has done great things. It even keeps epoxy from adhering. I do have a spot on the other table. I just need to get a scraper and pull it off, but most of it came off with just picking with my fingers. So the next step, or should I say the last step, I'm going to sand this. Now it is sanded ply, so I don't have to do a whole lot of work, but I am going to open it up to about a 150 grit, maybe a 220 grit, and then do about 3 or 4 coats of this boiled linseed oil and wax concoction. Probably have to make another batch, but that's okay. Right? Not going to bore you guys with all that stuff, but we'll come back once it's done so you can take a look at the finished product and maybe even see it in operation for the first time. So stick around. Like a lot of woodworkers will tell you, do the same finish on the top as you do on the bottom. Otherwise, you're leaving one side underprotected. You can get uneven moisture expulsion or moisture absorption, which can cause the table to bow or warp or twist or do all kinds of crazy things. Baltic Birch, I haven't seen that happen, but I don't take any chances with the amount of time I invest in some of these jigs and tools and surfaces I build for the shop. So the first layer was done with just straight up boiled linseed oil, waited about 12 to 18 hours for it to set up. I would have liked to have done it with a 50-50 mix of turpentine, but I didn't have any turpentine in the shop, and it was kind of late to go out to the local hardware store to get some. And Amazon couldn't get it here for 2 more days. So I just went ahead with, it's not going to hurt anything. It would have given me better absorption of the BLO into the wood, but that's okay. I know with the other tabletop, I didn't use it. I did a different technique with a different mixture for that tabletop. It worked out well, but I want to try something different for this tabletop. So what I ended up doing was after the got a good 12 to 18 hours after that first coat of just straight up boiled linseed oil, then I went back to my mixture, my wax mixture, which is this stuff here. It's boiled linseed oil, wax, I think it's paraffin wax in this one, as well as some mineral spirits to kind of break it down a bit. And this is after 2 coats of that. So it's still wet. I just finished the second coat on the top and the bottom. I do the bottom first and then the top because it is sitting on the Bora Centipede, so it leaves a little bit of marks. But what's going to happen tomorrow after this sets up is that there's going to be a coat of wax that's, well, the wax is embedded, but there's also some wax that stays on the surface. So what I do is I take my card scraper, scrape off the excess wax, and then get my buffer with a wool buffing pad, and then just buff the top and bottom surfaces to kind of even off the sheen, even off the surface. And it gives, like this table here, it gives just a nice smooth surface, a nice even surface, and a nice protective surface. And because of that wax, things move very smoothly across it. And of course, with a router sitting on here with a router lift, you're going to want the wood to be able to move relatively easily across that surface. So the wax is going to definitely help that. So definitely looking forward to that tomorrow. I'd probably give it at least 24, maybe even 48 hours of cure time before I use it the first time. I always do it kind of by sight, by touch, and by moisture, right? So if it's ready in 18, 24 hours, great. You really want to give it that 48 hours. Everything I've seen and everything I've read regarding this mixture, 24 hours is enough. I usually go that extra day. But scraping off the excess wax, probably do it after about 18 hours. Didn't seem to hurt it with the other surface, and made it much easier after 48 hours to do the buffing and whatnot. So one more step to go, and then we put it all back together and do the maiden cuts, right? See how that router table works and see if everything is going to do what I wanted it to do. One more thing I've been researching is how am I going to attach this top to the Centipede? So one issue I have with the other top is when you're getting into some heavy milling or some heavy work on it, tabletop wants to move a little bit. Bora has a couple things that are designed for their tabletops. I could cut into mine to kind of make it work, but I'm looking at some other options, some things that are not intended for this purpose. I know that the holes, these holes here are 3/4 of an inch, just over 3/4 inch, 0.761 is about the average measurement I'm getting off of this with my caliper. So about 3/4 of an inch. So there are pipe fittings, other things that there are ring. So it'd be a stem, a ring in the center of the stem, and then the bottom part of the stem, which would fit in here, and then the top part of the stem I would just drill a 3/4 inch hole into the tabletop. So, and that would be more than enough to kind of hold it in place, right? It's not going to keep it from bouncing up and down, but once you get weight of projects, get the weight of the board on there, and if I get all the outer supports connected to the tabletop, it's not going to shift a whole lot. Because basically I want to end up with something that's going to just hold the legs in place to the tabletop, not be up on the surface in the way of any kind of work we're doing, because that just adds one more thing we got to try and figure out later when we're doing a project. It's like, how are we going to work around these things sticking out of the top? Been there, done that, don't want to do it again. So keep you updated as this dries out, as we get to the finishing stage, and then see what we can use for fastening this tabletop down to the Centipede. All right, more to come. So now it's been a few days, and the finish of the table has had probably close to 72 hours now to cure. Ran my fingers across it, and it feels waxy. No wet spots over the entire surface, top and bottom. So next step, 2 stages. One, I'm going to take a card scraper and scrape off that gently scrape off the excess wax. There's definitely a buildup of wax on there after doing a couple coats of that finish. So I want to take some of that off. And then after taking off the excess wax, then I got a buffer with a wool pad on it, and we're going to use that to get it to a nice and shiny, no, not really shiny, but nice and smooth surface that is going to be great for the router lift and for the router table part of it. So let's get cleaning up. And once we get that done, we're going to go on the maiden voyage and give it its first test. So let's get cleaning. So once it was done with the scraping and buffing, I went ahead and put the lift in, got it all set, got the fence all put together, got that all set, and ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to rock and roll. So let's see how this thing works. I'm going to try a piece with the fence. I'm going to try, the one thing I really wanted to be able to do with this table is have a surface where if I was doing flush trim bits or certain types of edging or cutting, that I wouldn't have to use a fence. And the small little table I had before, it didn't have much of a work surface, and the fence was kind of stuck on there. I could have drilled it out and destroyed it to get it off, but it didn't make much sense because it's just a small tabletop one, and I'm sure somebody can use that in the state that it's in right now. I've used it for years, but as I learned more about woodworking, learned more about routing, got more comfortable with the router, realize that there's so much more the router that can do if it's in the right type of environment, if it's mounted in the right table and things like that. So I'm looking forward to some of the freehand stuff to be able to do with the router. So I'm going to try couple pieces out and see how it goes. Here we go. So I don't have a project where I need any routing right now, and I didn't want to use any good stock, so I used some birch plywood scraps that I had. I have to say I can't be happier with the result. A few things I do want to tweak. Definitely need to get a solution figured out for fastening the tabletops to the Bora Centipede. I got a few ideas in my wish list right now, and a couple of different online shopping apps. So I'm going to do some measurements, do a little bit of figuring out, and then maybe do an update to this video with the solution that I finally go with. But it was like butter. I kind of cheesed out too. I want to use a little round over bit and then a flush cut trimming bit. But the ability to use the fence, push the fence back, do it freehand. Everything's sliding across the table. I'm not hitting any bumps or lips with the plate for the router lift or with the T-tracks. So everything's moving across the table smoothly. Router's facing in the right direction, so I'm going against the turn of the bit. Just all in all, couldn't be happier with the result. So thanks for joining along for the journey. I know this is a long one, but thanks for sticking with it. And we got several other videos in production right now, making a lot of stuff that we think is really cool. And we'll have some videos with you, videos on those things here for you in the next weeks and months. So definitely want to thank a lot of people. Thank my daughter, who is my multimedia specialist, who's editing these videos. But first, before her, my wife, who lets me be out here from time to time, working on things, making things. It's definitely my passion. But most of all, and most importantly, the Lord our God. There's all these resources that we have. It's a small shop, but there's a lot of things that we have in here, and it's by His provision, by His creation of wood, one of my favorite of His creations. It's fantastic to work with. So just want to take a moment and close us out in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for all your blessings. Thank you for these things that you provide for us. Thank you for the things and the desires you put on our hearts and the skills that you give us. Father, we thank you for safety, and we ask that you keep all these woodworkers and all these people watching these videos, keep them safe, keep them free from harm, and keep their measurements true. And we do this all in your name and for your glory. Amen. All right. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been Adam with Sunflower Woodworking. Take care. Update, update, update. We got news for you. If you saw the video where we made a router table a router MFT or MPT table, one of the things that I said in the end of the video was that I had to figure out a solution for fastening the table to the Bora Centipede legs because it tended to slide around on the legs a little bit. And had a bunch of options and looked at a bunch of things, tried a bunch of different things out, and came up with a solution, a non-standard solution, because this is not a woodworking part. What we've got are these rubber expansion plugs. So these are automotive plugs. They are designed for freeze line hoses. So basically how this works, let's see if we can get this in focus here. How this works is this is a rubber bushing, and then there's a metal rod that has attached to this base and goes through with a threaded end. And then as you tighten this nut on the top, it expands the rubber bushing. So what I did to the table was I drilled out using a Forstner bit, drilled out a little bit of the table surface, just enough so that the nut and the washer will fit in there and be below the surface level, right? And then what happens is underneath the table, the bushing actually goes inside this hole. And then as I tighten this down, just using good old-fashioned socket wrench, as you tighten it down, it expands and then holds the table in place inside of the hole here without, one of my worries was when I was looking at other options is some of the other options, it would be a good tight fit, but my worry was about stressing the plastic on the Bora too much and maybe even cracking it, and then back to the same problem. So at least with these freeze plugs, with these rubber bushings, it'll put pressure, but not so much where it's going to crack any of the plastic on the Bora Centipede. So worked out great. It just reminds me that sometimes the solution in woodworking is not something that's related to woodworking. Like I said, these are automotive plugs, and it's really just coming up with, in your mind, what it is you need, what you're trying to achieve, what is the shape or general function of the thing that you're trying to find, and then start searching. Sometimes you'll find something quickly, sometimes it takes a bit. I tried PEX pipe fittings. I tried a couple of different size bench dogs. Tried about 5 or 6 different things, and some of them worked okay. Some of them the table would just sit on top, and and I'd have to drill from the bottom with a Forstner bit to create a cavity where the top of the other thing would actually sit inside the surface, or at least keep the surface from going back and forth, which was okay. But I was really hoping to find something that I could fasten to the Bora, fasten the top to the Bora, so that not only is it not going to slide, but if I accidentally bump it, it's not going to pick up or anything else like that. So these are pretty solid, holds it down really well. God be praised, found that in just a couple of days' time. Bought a pack of 4 just to try it out, and I had to order some more because there are of course the 4 corners, and I wanted to at least get this side in the middle and that side in the middle over there, get those fastened down as well. So I did have markings to do the side legs as well. But once you do the 3 on this side and the 3 on that side, it's pretty tight. It's stable. Nothing's going anywhere. So I'm going to leave that to once the excitement around finding a solution wears off and I get my mind straight again, then I'm going to go ahead and try a few things out with moving the table around, try a few different clamping a few things down and planing and whatnot to see if that causes any motion. I clamped and I tried a few things with just the 4 plugs and using some clamps to hold the 2 middle legs down, and it held famously. It worked really, really well. So good stuff. Hope this update helps, and happy woodworking. God bless.